What? Nick! Yo, Nick, get Zach. Come on, we gotta break this down for them. It's cellular respiration.
Here we go. We begin our journey with the cellular process, breaking down the glucose, which we call glycolysis. The products of this process don't go to Yugoslavia. We take all the pyruvates that go in the mitochondria.
Then we have the Krebs cycle, which happens across a nation, and from there we go to oxidative phosphorylation. Of all these processes, we build the foundation to the cellular process we call cellular respiration.
Going into glycolysis, let me tell you what happens. Outside the mitochondria, the glucose is cracking. During energy investment, enzymes change the shape of glucose into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. But wait, there's more, I've still yet to amaze. Making choice money during the energy payoff phase. The process of glycolysis has two products, 2 ATP and 2 pyruvate net profit.
Glucose and oxygen.
Okay, I know that came a little bit fast, but they just described the process of cellular respiration. And it seems complicated, but all we're doing is we're taking glucose, which is a big sugar molecule, and whatever we eat, whether it's a protein or a fat, all of it has the potential to be broken down into glucose. But glucose is too big, and so our body has to break it down again. And so that's what this whole story is about. And here we have glucose, the molecule, and that just won't go into our cells. It's too big. It has all these, there's a carbon at each corner, oxygen, hydrogen. And so we're going to break this sugar apart, and each time we break it down a little bit, we get this form of energy called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And that's the energy that drives our whole body. It keeps our body temperature where it is, and it gives us the ability to move and to think. For convenience, we break this whole process down into steps. The first one is glycolysis, and that just means splitting sugar. Glycolysis, lysis means to split. We're going to take this big 6-carbon sugar, and don't let me lose you. It's just, I mentioned the sugar is too big, so our first step is to break it down into 2 parts. And so we go from 6 carbon to 2 3-carbon molecules. These are called pyruvate, and there's no oxygen needed. And later on you'll find out why that's important. We get 2 ATP, so 2 packets of energy from this first step, glycolysis. From here, we get this acetyl CoA. Now, I know there's some vocabulary words, but not too many. I mean, there's, so far, glucose, glycolysis, pyruvate, acetyl CoA. So we have like 4 vocab words so far. It's going to prepare pyruvate because pyruvate's still too big. Okay, here's our 3-carbon pyruvates, still too big for the body to use. And that means they just float in the bloodstream, pretty much useless, until we convert it into something that can be converted again. And that's what the second step, the wrap video mentioned the Krebs cycle. And here's where acetyl CoA, if you remember that from the first step, it's going to flow into the mitochondria of the cell. It's an organelle. You have a series of reduction, oxidation reactions. We call them redox, and phosphorylation. And phosphate's huge. Okay, phosphate, ATP. The P is the phosphate. And what we're doing, right, is think of electrons as being the energy of the currency. And so we convert, really, we're converting sugar into electrons and bonds. And NADH is just a vehicle. Let's take a look at this. So acetyl CoA enters the Krebs cycle. Now, a person could spend their whole life memorizing this, but we're not going to. We're just going to know that it's a cycle, and we get 2 ATP from this reaction, 2 ATP. Remember, we got 2 ATP from glycolysis. And you might think, okay, 2 ATP or 1,000, who cares? Well, it does matter, and we'll get to that towards the end of the story. Now, the third step, because we go glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and finally, we're going to squeeze the last bit of energy out of that glucose. So here we go. Electrons moving down the energy gradient, and we're going to give off ATP because there's ATP is used, and when it's used up, it isn't just burned into like dust. It's just reduced into or oxidized into ADP. It's diphosphate. We have only 2 phosphates. So you pick up a phosphate and a bond, high energy, low energy. Okay, so you eat that turkey sandwich, and then you go for a walk, and now you got ADP, and you got to eat something again, or your liver and your muscles will dump some ATP in there too. Oxygen down at the end, and we get water. So it's a very clean burning kind of fuel. If we have aerobic with oxygen, and that's what we're seeing here, this is aerobic respiration. We get 2 plus 2 plus, well, that's not really correct, 32. We get 36 total ATP per 1 glucose, okay? And that's a lot, all right? So one tiny sugar molecule, so small you can't even see it, is broken down to pyruvate. Nice review here. In the mitochondria, the Krebs cycle, we get 2 more ATP. And finally, the electron transport chain, that long chain where we get 32 ATP. Net gain 36. Now, what if we don't have oxygen or we don't use it? Some creatures can't use oxygen, and sometimes we can't use oxygen, like if we're sprinting. So we have this alternative energy pathway called fermentation. We have glycolysis, which is the same as we learned at the very beginning. Big 6-carbon molecule broken into 2 pyruvates. We get 2 ATP. Okay, so that's the same as aerobic. But here's the difference. Okay, we've done this first step, glycolysis, but now we can't go to Krebs cycle. Remember the Krebs cycle? Well, we can't go there because Krebs needs oxygen. So without oxygen, we're kind of in trouble. If you're a bacteria or a human, really, almost any animal, we make lactic acid, and that's the end. We get 2 ATP. So that's pretty wasteful. Think about it. You could get 36 ATP if you could breathe, but if you're sprinting, then you get only 2 per sugar, and you get a lot of waste products because lactic acid is irritating to the muscles. It causes a muscle soreness, and it can cause death as well. It's that toxic. Now, if you're a yeast, you don't produce lactic acid, you produce alcohol, and that is $1 billion business in California because that's how wine and beer and so forth are made. The waste products from alcohol fermentation is, of course, ATP is not a waste product. It's energy. That's what we want. That's the good stuff. But the byproducts, ethanol, CO2, and heat. In us, we produce CO2 and heat, but instead of ethanol, we produce something very, very similar. I mentioned lactic acid. All right, so very wasteful. Here's a bigger part of the story. This is us. We don't ferment alcohol from sugar, so we make this lactic acid. The other name for it is lactate, same thing. And these are all waste products. And so that's why, when you are pushing hard and you're breathing rapidly, you go to oxygen debt, you're going to produce some waste products. And you can't do that very long before you're going to collapse. And you're getting a lot of CO2 built up, and that's why you're breathing hard, because too much CO2 makes your blood acidic. So it's much better to try to stay in an aerobic kind of a pathway. Well, why do we have this fermentation, right? It makes no sense. Well, let's take a look at it. Here's aerobic. The first one we covered, 36 ATP, very efficient. No waste products really, clean burning, very conservative. Fermentation, well, only 2 ATP, extremely wasteful. Toxins produced, either alcohol or lactate. But there must be a reason, and one of the reasons we have it is life-saving or life-giving, really. Let's say someone comes at you with a knife in an alley, and you're running as fast as you can. You go into a sprint, and you run out of oxygen, but you make that last final push, and your legs are aching, your lungs are burning, but you are alive because you went into fermentation. 2 ATP, wasteful, yes, but you made it. Or let's say you're trying to make that baby, and you're there with your your spouse in bed, and you're just getting so tired, but you know that you're almost there, and so you make that final push, and you go from aerobic to anaerobic, or fermentation. You're breathing rapidly, and you make that baby. So you can see it's life-giving. Let's see if we can get a little wrap-up here, a little summary. We can get some help from these guys. Let's see, where do they get to? Right around, they have a nice summary coming up here. Well, here it is.
How it goes. So now we got pyruvate.
Actually, there's two.
Oh yeah, that's right. Now let me tell you what they do. First it gets a CoA and loses hydrogen. NAD plus takes the Krebs cycle begin. Now we lose the H2O, but then we get another, and then reduces NAD plus smooth as butter. Now CO2 is lost, and we oxidize, and with the help of GTP, ATP arise. So now we continue with one more oxidation, getting NADH. 2 ATP total in this part of respiration as the electrons move on to another place.
The main objective is for cells to gather energy. That's why when in this chain we'll make 34 ATP. Electrons gather in the membrane of the mitochondria, but in this state the ion movement is controlled in chiron. Before you know, you won't know where those protons went, because they travel down the electrochemical gradient. ATP synthesis and we'll get a high dosage of hydrogen ions during chemiosmosis. Now is a
Alright, I know that comes fast, but sometimes it's good to hear from someone else. So there we have it. Glycolysis, Krebs, electron transport. If there's oxygen, 36. If there's not oxygen, we get to fermentation. Alright, thanks for listening.